we went through, when we were talking, I don't know, maybe it was a month or two ago, and we did a show, basically, how is Donald Trump going to make this choice? How is Donald Trump going to pick his VP? And we came up with a bunch of different categories to go through. And I've been talking about JD Vance for a long time as the person who I thought he would pick, and kind of, I think the person, if I were him, I would probably pick. And we can go through the reasons why. But I wanted to bring up that list again because we can now look at it with the evidence of who he picked and see if these check marks were checked off as he went through the thought process to pick who he was going to have as a guy who's, as we saw, an inch away from running the country if Donald Trump wins. It's a serious, serious choice. So outside of the obvious, which is like, hey, the person needs to be doing the job and things like that, he'd be able to actually do the job. There's a bunch of ways I think Donald Trump was going to think about this. And he had one major decision, which he wound up making, I think, emphatically here. What does Donald Trump want in a vice president? He's got to make a decision between an attack dog or someone who does no harm. Now, you think back to 2016, Mike Pence is more of a do no harm candidate, right? He was definitely not an attack dog. He just kind of stepped back and he was there when he was needed, but generally speaking was not much of an exclamation point. Let's put it that way. He's not the most electric speaker we've ever seen. One of the things that I think was fascinating about this choice as opposed to 2016 is the position Donald Trump made it from. And the reason why he went with an attack dog rather than a do no harm kind of candidate. Back in 2016, Donald Trump picked his vice president from a position of weakness. He had won the primary, but he had not united the party. There were still lots and lots of questions. People did not want him, people threatening to go third party. He wanted to bring as many evangelicals under his banner. This is a guy who's saying 2 Corinthians at the time. Like, he's not exactly a believable religious, person for a voter that wants that type of candidate. And so he brought in Mike Pence, who is a believable religious person. It really matters to him. And it helped secure the base. Obviously, the Supreme Court also helped there as well. But that was like, hey, I'm weak in this area. I need someone to help me with it. It's the opposite of what he's doing here. 2024, Donald Trump, he's picking from a position of strength. Now, look, sometimes you make bad choices when you pick from a position of strength because you believe there's hubris involved there. You believe you're infallible and you're like, I can pick whoever I want. I'm going to pick the guy I want the most, even if it's not going to help me. And there are criticisms that have been made on this pick based on those arguments. But that being said, Donald Trump, I think, rightly believes the vice president is not going to be the factor that wins or loses this election. And he decides he wants someone who's going to go out there and fight for him on television interviews, who's going to do a good job as an attack dog. And that's the direction he went in. Another factor in picking a vice president for Donald Trump, someone who addresses a specific group. This is a very traditional thing. I'll pick someone from a particular state that I want to win that's close, or I'll pick a woman or a person of color to address that particular group. And that's the way a lot of people talked about this leading up. I kept saying this on the air, particularly on radio. I said it multiple times. Everyone keeps telling me he's going to go with like a woman or a person of color. And I think he could have gone with some of those people. It's definitely possible. I think they were in consideration. I mean, Marco Rubio, by all reports, was one of the final 3. But at the end of the day, when have we thought of Donald Trump as a guy who's like worried about identity politics? I mean, his whole persona is no. His whole persona, first of all, coming into the White House was the guy who's going to say you're fired based on your performance. And secondarily, he's a guy who doesn't care about all the woke nonsense, right? That's why, people, a big reason why people love him. So I never was a big believer that he would go that direction. And obviously, JD Vance shows that he's not going to go that direction. And I will say, from the specific idea of addressing a group, normally that means a demographic group. And I think it kind of does here as well. JD Vance is from Ohio, and Ohio is not a state that is in any danger of being lost by Donald Trump. He's probably going to win it by double digits. So he didn't need help in Ohio. Ohio, unlike 2004, where it was the swingiest of swing states, is no longer in that category. It is a red state. But that being said, the states that Donald Trump needs to win, more than any other state, he needs to pick off one, at least, of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. These are states that are right around Ohio, have similar demographics, similar industrial interests, have a similar, more populist view of where economically the Republican Party and the country should go. having JD Vance there, I mean, and there was a decent amount of reporting about this, that hit, one of the things that Trump kept saying about JD Vance is we're just going to leave him in Pennsylvania. In other words, like, he's just going to be talking to those people all the time. I want him talking to those people, not necessarily just because he's from Ohio. I mean, lots of people were from Ohio. Rob Portman, the last Ohio senator before, would not at all appeal in these same ways to these voters. But this is the hillbilly elegy guy. This is the guy who's talking about the problems from in these specific areas. He's talking about the concerns of families who live in these areas. Many of his policies are specifically addressed toward working class people who live in these areas. And like, if you want to look at the easiest path for Joe Biden to be elected, it is a narrow 272, type electoral vote victory, which goes through goes through that entire blue wall. He picks off and holds all those blue wall states. It doesn't matter if Donald Trump wins Arizona and Nevada and Georgia and North Carolina. He still loses. So from that perspective, I think that the Vance pick is a little smarter than people are making it out to be. What does Donald Trump want in a vice president? He's good with the media. Well, that's JD Vance. I mean, he's really, really good with the media. In fact, that's kind of where he came from. As I mentioned, Hillbilly Elegy, which, by the way, is now topping Amazon hours after the running mate has been announced. And you remember, this is the book. Here's what the cover looked like, and here's what the movie, which the movie was kind of panned critically. There's some reporting that really pissed off JD Vance, who was kind of more in the elite circles. I mean, the guy went to, as I mentioned, he went to Yale. He was in high finance and tech and all these things. And he was pissed off that his book that everybody seemed to love, and then they gave it to Netflix and everyone was like making fun of it. And that was part of the reason why. Now, I don't know. That seems pretty petty for JD Vance. I don't know if that's actually true, but of course I would be probably pissed off too. But that's the thing. He is a person who is good with the media. He knows how to argue. He can go on. He can be, an attack dog for Donald Trump, but also know when to change the tone and know when he's being attacked and know when he's not being attacked and how to work a media. So he's very, very good at that. He's very smooth on the air, and that's really, really important to Donald Trump. Also, he's got a beautiful family. His wife, Usha, wife of Trump's VP, is a lawyer and Yale graduate. She's formerly a liberal, I believe, and has had a conversion over the years. But it's a good-looking family, kind of like what you'd want as someone you're bringing on. You don't want people to look like Jeffy. That's not what you want out of your feet. No, that's just me. I'm just kidding. Okay, light on abortion is the next one. Light on abortion. Hey. Look, this is not something I'm comfortable with. I've told you 100 times I'm not comfortable with it. I'm not going to bore you with the details on that. But what Donald Trump wants is someone who's not going to sit out here like Mike Pence and talk about being pro-life from the moment of conception all the time. He wants to basically, I think his ideal thing is to never talk about it at all because he thinks it's a bad political issue. Now, look, I'm not even going to go too far into this because you've heard my spiel on this. Donald Trump has a good record when it comes to abortion. I don't like what he's necessarily doing with the de-emphasizing of it, but I do understand it seems to be more of a political calculation. I guess you look at his record and you hope that he holds on to what his record has been. So I won't go too far into that, but you understand that that's someone who, that's what he wants. He doesn't want someone who's going to be out there. He doesn't want an abortion crusader as VP. I will say, if you watch some of JD Vance's interviews on the issue of life, he has adopted some of those views. So he's malleable in that way. All right, loyalty. I mean, there's no question about that. It's an interesting thing, of course, with JD Vance, as he was a never Trumper for a while, came to the Trump bandwagon a little bit later, and then has been undyingly loyal ever since. And that is something that Donald Trump loves. He loves a convert. He loves somebody who used to be a big questioner of him, that has seen the light in his words or his eyes, and has come to the Trump train, and someone who will go out in the difficult moments and defend him. He wants someone who is going to get on television the day after the Access Hollywood tape comes out and say why Donald Trump should still be president in the United States and you're crazy for voting for the other guy, or in that particular case, the other woman. That is the type of situation that's what he wants, and I think he's got that in JD Vance. Straight out of Central Casting, I mentioned how his family, himself as well. There's a new article out. JD Vance won over Donald Trump. It goes over to some of the things that have been very familiar with Trump reporting over the years. Specific things about appearance that he really likes and doesn't like. It mentions in there that he likes JD Vance in his appearance. He's lost weight. He's got a more well-groomed beard. He's wearing better-fitting suits, things like that. He's got a good-looking family. He looks good on television. That type of thing is definitely part of what Trump likes. And look, Trump is a television guy. You can mock that if you want. You can mock the idea that he cares about those things. But in reality, what world are we living in? We're living in a very visual world. Ask Richard Nixon in his debate whether it's a visual world or not. It's true. It's come a long way. People are on Instagram all the time. And the fact that they can get somebody who looks good on television and who can be presentable is something that's important these days, and it's important to the president, former president at least. What does Donald Trump want in a vice president? A fundraiser. This is a big one because Donald Trump, look, he can go glad hand with the best of them, okay? He can work a room really, really well. It's something he's known and had to do through business as much, for a very, very long time. He's also very, very wealthy and could probably fund this campaign himself if he wanted to, but he wants to be able to raise money. He wants to be able to bring in the cash. He wants someone who can relate to that crowd. And one of the things in that previous article from the New York Times they talked about was when he made a pitch to Donald Trump, not to be vice president, but just to kind of align and get his endorsement early on. His idea was to bring sort of an intellectual basis to the things that Trump wants. We'll have a clip from Van Jones that explains this a little bit here in a second. But like this idea that he can talk to those people, he can talk to the National Review types, he can talk to the tech conservatives, the tech libertarians. He could talk to those people because he knows those people. He was one of those people. So he can work those rooms. He can bring in tons and tons of money. And there are major, major names. The David Sachs of the world, the Peter Thiel Peter Thiel was one of Vance's biggest fundraisers, another billionaire, and now Elon Musk as well were advocating for Vance to be the pick. They were pushing very, very hard behind the scenes. At least all the reporting indicates that, and I don't think it's a huge shock that we have the this big endorsement announcement tweet from Elon Musk recently, and now this. Elon Musk has said he is committing around $45 million a month to a new pro-Trump super PAC. That is a lot of cash. Now, it's not a lot of cash to Elon Musk, who probably would just drop $45 million in the street and not really realize it. But it is a major, major investment, and it makes Donald Trump's life a hell of a lot easier. He can go out to rallies, he can go talk to people, he can go on television, and he doesn't have to be worried about backroom meetings all the time raising money when there's money flowing in like this to the account. What does Donald Trump want in a vice president? Another category, subservience. And this one seems negative, right? Like a subservience. I mean, who wants to be subservient? But this is a required characteristic of every vice president. If you are not a subservient vice president, you're not a very good vice president. You have to be able to push your own views down to support the guy at the top of the ticket. That means in the campaign, but it also means in a policy basis and every single day. Behind the scenes, you can push back. But in front of the cameras, you guys are like a unified front. And, JD Vance, who is very, very good at arguing all these points, has shown he's very comfortable going down those roads over the past few years, and I actually think will fit that very, very well. And this is the last one, and I think it's one that's been underplayed. But the number one thing Donald Trump wants in a vice president is someone who isn't Mike Pence. He wants a non-Pence on January 6th. And what I mean by that is, the most defining moment of Donald Trump's presidency, I think, in his mind, is January 6th, where he wanted one thing to happen, and his vice president told him no. And then you have the January 6th thing, and everything kind of spirals out of control. What he wants is someone in a moment like that who's going to stand by him and do what he wants. And look, you might think that's really bad for the country. I tend to agree with the way Mike Pence handled January 6th. So I don't necessarily want someone fooling with some of these lines. But I do think Donald Trump is saying, of course, he obviously believes they're not fooling with those lines, and he believes that it's, he's right on those issues, and he wants someone who's going to be there and stand by him. And look, he gets to choose who his vice president is. So that is I think, a requirement, and I think JD Vance hits that standard of not being a Mike Pence in those moments. You wonder, however, is this kind of like the big thing is like this is the final kind of nail in the coffin for the traditional Republican Party. And I would argue that if it's not, it's close. I mean, look, Donald Trump, it's Donald Trump's party. I get a little annoyed at some people who kind of come out and they're just like, oh, gosh, Mitch McConnell's always getting in the way and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I guess kind of. I mean, I see the point there. But at the end of the day, this is Donald Trump's party. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of Trump Corporation. Like, that is what it is. He has, I mean, you know, literally his daughter-in-law is one of the main figures of the RNC at this point. Like, there's no question about whose party this is. And this means, though, the one question left was, when Donald Trump is gone, which even if he wins, it's 4 years away, what happens next? Do the old school people rise up and say, well, that was a crazy experiment, now let's go this direction? Or does Donald Trump hand this off to someone for some sort of legacy? And that's what I think the representation of JD Vance is. He's 39 years old. He has an intellectual backing for all of these policies, and he really, really believes them. Trump bets on MAGA's successor in JD Vance. Exactly what he's doing. This is also a legacy pick, and it's a pick. It's in some ways a luxury pick, right? It is a pick that is made from a position of strength. Let me give you this one last thing before we leave. I know we're running a little late, but here is Van Jones talking about J.D. Vance, as always, more dangerous than Trump is always every new politician's description. But listen to his reasoning here.
You know, part of the reason that J.D. Vance matters isn't for these kind of short-term electoral calculations. He matters because of what he means to the Republican Party long-term. This is cementing a kind of nationalism. Yeah. Now, Trump, to your point, I agree with you. He's an instinctive, impulsive, intuitive nationalist. J.D. Vance is an ideological nationalist. That's a much more dangerous virus because he can polish this stuff and make it seem palatable to people. He can sell this stuff to Silicon Valley. He can sell this stuff other places. And what it does is it locks the Republican Party on a pathway that I think is dangerous for the world.
You can disagree with your the dangerous for the world part there, but he's right on most of that. Like, that is what this is happening, and it's one of the reasons he's doing this. He's saying, like, hey, I'm going to be gone in 4 years. Either way, how does this move forward? Do I just come back and get, if we put Marco Rubio on, then it becomes Marco Rubio's party? Or do I have someone like J.D. Vance who's essentially going to effort forward the same types of policies I believe in?